excellent presentation with a lot of information, and we'll open that to question on the question and answer button at the bottom of the screen.
Yeah.
We move next to Italy, to Umberto Nocco, and it's yours, Umberto. Take it.
Thank you,
Yes,
everybody. Thank you for having me on this webinar. I'm very pleased to share a little bit of experience we had around here. We were the first highly affected nations outside China before the outbreak spread more or less all over the world. Basically, we had to assess a kind of issues, a certain number of issues that we figured out with the ongoing of the outbreak. To be truly honest, I must admit that we weren't really prepared, and we were looking at China rather in a strange mode, because we actually weren't understanding very well what they were doing with these hospitals being built and stuff. And then we had this huge wave coming on to us, and we needed to react really, really fast. First of all, the first issue was to assess different patient clinical needs. Li has said a lot about devices and everything you need to make all these patients run and assist them. And we had to figure out how many we needed and where they were needed, because in the first place, patients were assessed in the ERs and were sent more or less directly to the intensive care units, and then we had to figure out a way to treat them, especially if they weren't so critical to go into intensive care units. This proposed us with a huge hill to climb, because we weren't we had to face a sort of just-in-time machine availability, especially on the ICU devices, such as ventilators, CPA system for pressure, high pressure and high flow systems, monitoring systems, and all the things you need to build up an ICU beds. Besides of this, we had to figure out where to put these beds, and many hospitals had the chance to have some spare spaces that they could be put up and prepared as ICUs, while others had to switch to cases and move the patients to other wards and to other areas of the hospital, which were to be updated to host less or more critical patients, rather than the ones they used to have. This introduced a lot of organizational issues, because, of course, as I said, we had to convert wards to host infected patients, but we had to also to think again all the protocols and all the movements of personnel and patients, as Li showed before. They had two different corridors for patients and for clinicians. In many cases, we didn't have the chance to do that, so we had to sort of invent, come up with new solutions, and of course, we had to acquire all kinds of protection devices and protection vests and clothings and stuff like that. Of course, this ended up in a big problem in acquiring devices. We figured out that the market is quite, especially in Italy, is quite late in providing new devices to the hospitals, although because we were almost asking them today for tomorrow, and this was a very big deal. We had major incomes of new devices such as ventilators and stuff coming from China, of course, which is probably one of the fastest producing markets. And then we experienced a sort of closures among other nations throughout Europe. Many times we are dependent, for example, most of our devices come from Germany. When the outbreak started over in Germany, we figured out that we had less availability of devices produced in Germany and being sent abroad to other countries, even throughout Europe, especially Italy. One last thing I would like to say is we also are experiencing a kind of a sort of philosophical, but not really philosophical issue we're running. We have the problem of acquiring a lot of devices. I'm talking about China, but we have also devices such as ventilators coming from Russia, but also coming from the United States that don't have a CE mark on them. And as you may know, if you should put some medical devices in use in Italy, they should have a CE mark. And so we're trying also as an association here in Italy, in the Italian Association of Clinical Engineers, we're trying to figure out a way to sort of have a sort of backdoor to the CE mark and have protocols and have ways of defining how devices can be safe and efficient in the same way we are granted with a CE mark stapled on the device, so that we could put into use also devices and ventilators and all kinds of machinery that can come from different markets, maybe outside Europe, or probably they weren't intended to be sold in a European market, which is another way of saying this. Last but not least, then I'm finished really. There's, of course, we had to try to think about also how our biomeds and our clinical engineers are moving throughout the wards and throughout the hospitals, because we don't want to get infected. That's obvious, but still we need to go into ICUs and into critical areas to work on machines and to assess all the devices for installation, for maintenance and stuff like that. So we need to figure out protocols to have a safe access, which is not just safe, meaning in the way you assess the ICUs, the way you're dressed, the way you move around the ICUs, but also how many times you access the ICUs. There are many things that can be done by the personnel inside the ICUs without requiring a biomed or a clinical engineer being there all the time. But this is some sort of educational issue you have to put on the people who work inside the hospitals.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Umberto.
You're
and
welcome.
we're going to go on to our colleague, Dr. Jitendra Sharma over in India. Jitendra?
And from inside the hospital, we're jumping to the other side of the industry.
Right, absolutely. Yadin and Tom, nice meeting all of you on a great day during a tough time. So just three things from India. My colleague from Italy mentioned something about CE mark and standards, the safety of equipment that all of us are buying in governments. I think that's something that the governments, despite having specifications from Adriana in late March, are still confused about, because the safety standards around ventilation has not yet been advertised well within the procurement agencies. Whether it is IEC standards of 1-1, 1-2 and 2-12, or it is a biocompatibility standard of tubing. The safety standards is not well known yet, which is, and in every country there is a lot of innovations around ventilator that's happening right now. And in the name of ventilator, whatever we innovate, that needs to comply with safety standards and correct specs. That's extremely important, which we have facilitated the governments here. Two is the Indian Biomedical Skill Council was, through its accreditation program, lucky to catch hold of every single biomed engineer and biomed technician who is a ventilator specialist, create a database from across the country with their phone numbers and cities, and circulate it to all the associations and clinical practitioners, so that these guys who actually maintain and repair a ventilator are known. And 3, which is a more of an infrastructure boost, the AMTZ, which I represent as its CEO, I was able to convince the World Bank to provide financial support to set up large-scale assemblies through a government sponsorship program. And we have been able to set up 6 ventilator manufacturing assemblies capable of producing about 6,000 ventilators a month at AMTZ, which all of you have visited during the Global Forum, and 3 diagnostic kit manufacturing assembly lines. In fact, we started our diagnostic kit assembly of 2,000 kits per day yesterday, and we are going up to 40,000 kits per day in about 10 days. So if I were to summarize, what we have done is taking care of standards and specs, which is one point of a triangle, making sure that we have record of every single biomed engineer who specializes in ventilator or can repair ventilator, maintain it, consolidating that list with the cities and their contact details. That's number 2, point 2 of the triangle. And the third point of the triangle is setting up very fast, large-scale manufacturing facilities at AMTZ, simply because we have all the EMI, EMC, and ASTM and biomaterial testing lab, accelerated aging centers, and ready factory space to ensure that we are not only able to take care of national demand, but in about 30 to 45 days are able to come to the service of our global community. Thank you very much. We can't hear you, Yadin.
Thank you for staying up in the middle of the night.